Greetings, programs! Welcome to episode 25. Why non-binary is a made-up gender, and that's okay. So, unlike some of the recent epistemology episodes, this one is going to be all about feelings and identity and such. If you have ever gone, huh, what? At the idea of non-binary genders, genderqueer, 71 Tumblr genders or what have you, then this is the episode for you. We will be covering some of the same ground, and as in a previous video, why conservatives cannot handle trans people, but today we'll be focusing in on something that has only been brushed over before. But, as usual, we are going to have to lay some groundwork. Because non-binary itself is not a complex concept, but the reason that most people can't get their heads around it is that the basic understanding of what sex and gender is are based on assumptions that are wrong. And why are they wrong? For the same reason that people who say all blackbirds are black are wrong, because they have it backwards. A blackbird is not a blackbird because it's black. That are usually black. There are other kinds of black-coloured birds, and you can have an albino blackbird, which is a blackbird that isn't black. Basically, people assume that because all the blackbirds they see are black, then all blackbirds must be blackbirds, and vice versa. And if that sounds confusing, consider we're only talking about blackbirds. So, what's this all got to do with sex, gender, and non-binary people? Well, basically, the default assumption people have about sex and gender is wrong. Most people assume there is some near magical inherent property of maleness or femaleness that makes a person male or female. They won't say it like that, but that is how it comes out. That the cells and tissues of a man are deeply and fundamentally, near magically, different from those of a woman. And no, they are not. In roughly the same way that a Lego model of a woman is constructed from the same sorts of bricks as a Lego model of a man. Same plastic, same blocks, just in different places and different proportions. The blocks are not magically female or made from a female type of plastic or even female-shaped blocks. They're the same blocks. They're just arranged in female ways rather than male ways. And the same goes for male and female cells. What's that, imaginary interviewer? I'm forgetting DNA? And that Y or X chromosome is what makes you male or female? No, it does not. DNA contains a template for building a body, and it can be overridden or ignored. Those cells are not especially male or female, as demonstrated rather nicely by a condition known as androgen insensitive syndrome, or AIS. Left to itself, the default condition of a body is female, or at least female-shaped. The SRY gene complex controls hormonal balance in developing humans, and if present, will push the body to grow in a masculine direction by causing the cells to flood the rest of the body with male hormones, testosterone. There are other genes that control whether the gonads develop into ovaries or testes, but the SRY gene does most of the heavy lifting in terms of making you seem male or female. But, just like some people can have bodies that ignore insulin and thus are diabetic, bodies also can ignore testosterone. This is AIS. And thus a person can have XY chromosomes and testosterone, but develop a body that seems perfectly female. They will be sterile, as they do still have the genes that make the testes and not ovaries, but in all other ways they are female. In all the ways you come to expect. Less body hair, narrow shoulders, broader hips, vagina, breasts, etc. Female in every way that we would recognize, save for the ability to have children, and that's not exclusive to XY females. Even though every cell has that aforementioned Y chromosome. So no, not female cells. Just cells that didn't get the message to assemble in a male way. And the converse is also possible. XX male, where the SRY complex breaks off when the sperm is being made, and the SRY gene gets attached to the X chromosome. They develop male in every way, just as before, though they too are sterile. Basically, if the cells are assembled in a male pattern or a female pattern, we just call that male or female. No inherent maleness or femaleness in any cell. No magic, just a tendency. Okay, so why does that all matter? Well, in the absence of some magical essence of maleness or femaleness, what does make us male or female? Well, basically, it's just a labeling scheme. Sure, if you ask somebody, they'll say genetics, but we already covered that. And no one demands to see a gene test before they say, hello sir or madam. Nah. If you've heard the phrase, walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, probably a duck. Well, same here. If they act like a man and look like a man and think they are a man, that's how we know to call them a man, regardless of whatever genes they happen to have. Which is why the phrase, trans men are men, matters so much. It's not just a slogan, it's true. The only difference is, a trans man has, probably, less of the traits naturally occurring that we'd use to identify them as a man. You don't need to look into your pants, or to check your genes, or even to look in a mirror to know that you are a man. If you do, you might want to talk to somebody about that. Now, a trans person feels the same way you do. They know their gender just as well as you do. They know who they are. The difference is, they have more of their bodily traits that don't match than you yourself perhaps might have. So rather than being a man who just happens to have narrow shoulders, or a man who's lacking in body hair, they are a man that lacks both, and probably some other traits as well. Which is why the identity of the person is a real deciding factor. I do not get to decide if you are not a man, if you don't have sufficient upper body strength, do I? Do I get to call you not a man if you also lack body hair? At what point am I right if I call you something other than a man? Can I call you a man if you look and act like a woman in all respects but have a penis? If you still feel like a man and call yourself a man? At what point? Well, the short answer is never. This is why what makes a man is how they identify. And in the future, this will be even more unarguable. Because you'll be able to hop into a tank and get rebuilt on a cellular level, chromosomes and all. Fun experiment to try it on somebody. If they are having trouble with sex and gender, ask them what would happen if a gene test showed them that they had the wrong chromosomes, one of the conditions up above. Would they start acting like another gender and identifying that way? Would they suddenly call themselves a woman? Or would they suddenly call themselves a man? And the answer is no. No, they wouldn't. They'd just chalk it up to, I'm a person who has wonky genes, and move on, and probably never even tell anyone. After all, you'd have to be pretty solidly crazy if you had a freak-out session just because the person you're with said, oh yeah, when I was born it turns out I had this extra X chromosome, or this extra Y chromosome, and then you freak out. That's probably not a good sign for you. So how does all this relate to non-binary, and what is it anyway? Well, thank you for asking, imaginary interviewer. I'm glad you asked. See, a non-binary person is somebody who identifies as a gender, same as everybody else. But in most cases, this is a gender that does not align with their body's developed traits, much like a trans person, which is why a lot of non-binary folks consider themselves to be part of the trans community. The difference is, the gender that they do identify with is not, in fact, at either end of the scale. It's not obviously male or obviously female. And in a lot of these cases, the gender that they do identify as does not have a name, because we only have names for the extremes, one at either end, male or female. Remember, male and female are just labels we apply to clusters of traits that are common. No person possesses 100% of all male traits or female traits. It's not that common. Everybody's got something that's just a little bit askew from the perfect ideal of masculinity or femininity, whether it be shape, muscle mass, body hair, or lack thereof, whatever you like. There's always something that's not quite 100%. And currently, there are no solid, grippable labels for a gender that is just like female, only with a hairy chest and more upper body strength, or sort of boyish, but not really male or female. And then there are some folks who just don't identify with any of that. They just don't do male or female. Or they just don't care about all this gender business and just want to be a person. And when you ask them, they'll say, I'm a person, okay? Why does this stuff matter? Or even their conception of their gender identity might change over time. This is usually what's called gender fluid. Just like a person who might otherwise be considered bisexual might, over time, have their tastes change from being more attracted to males to more attracted to females, the same kind of thing can, and sometimes does, happen with your identity. Over time, it can shift from one to the other and back again, and of course, Obviously, because the needle is swinging up and down a scale, it will spend a significant amount of time in the middle. Now, this is all made up. Yep, that's right, non-binary is a made-up gender category. There are no genes for non-binary gender, and gender itself is not always based on sex traits, as discussed. Just most often it happens to line up that way. But then, like non-binary, man and woman are similarly made up. A social construct, like money, which is why the final arbiter of all this business is the person's identity, what they feel like. That's right, feelings do matter. Which neatly addresses the question, what is the difference between a trans woman and a man in a dress? The short answer is, how they identify themselves. A man in a dress feels and identifies as a man in a dress. A trans woman feels like a woman and identifies as such. They just happen to have the inconvenience of having a body that doesn't quite match what they would like it to match. And it's a rare person, trans or otherwise, that doesn't have anything they don't want to change about themselves, or how their internal identity tells them it should be. So there you have it. Why non-binary is a totally made-up term, a social construct, just like man and woman, or even male and female. Which is also why it is not correct to say it's not real. Just because something is a social construct does not make it irrelevant or without grounding in reality. Money is a social construct. There's no intrinsic magical value to those pieces of paper. They only have value as long as we all agree that yes, they have value. And anybody who's ever watched an apocalyptic movie where the rich guy tries to buy passage on a boat at the end of the world, they will know you can't eat pieces of paper. You can't build a boat to escape zombies out of pieces of paper. You can't kill zombies with pieces of paper. And if nobody wants them, they are just worthless pieces of paper. Same here. In the description below, I've added a big stack of useful links to more information, if this was not clear enough for you. Tune in next week where we discuss how to be right by trying to be wrong and failing. Bye for now.